your time. Thank you, and welcome to our second webinar in this series on instructional coaching. We're going to be focusing on shifting educator perception of instructional coaching today. So thank you for coming and learning with us. If you can, just in the chat, drop in the city and state that you live in, and then one word to describe educator perception of your coaching program, if you have one. So, just try to synthesize in one word what you think educators think about instructional coaching. And then Rob, did you start recording? We're recording, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Anything in the chat, Rob?
Yes, we have Barbie from Portland, Oregon. And Sarah's from Gilbert, and the one word is difficult. I think they think of it as a way to fix bad educators, which is a very common theme. So don't feel bad about that.
That is common. We will absolutely be kind of addressing and talking through that. So thank you for sharing that information. So this is just a quick overview of who we are. So I'm Ildi Lasko-Kerr. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Forbidden. On our webinar, we've got Rob DeBacco, and we're supported by a team of educators and experts and professionals to make sure that the work that we're doing is actually supporting and filling needs in schools today. So just take a quick second to review the learning objective that's on the screen. As we get into the conditions that lead to some of the negative perceptions of instructional coaching, we'll talk about human capital, financial, and operational. But obviously, those of us who've been working in schools for a long time know that those three factors are really interconnected, and they're usually driven by financial constraints. So we'll be talking about that, as well as hopefully providing you some tools today to both assess the perceptions of educators in your school and district, but as additionally to that, to help to start to shift them. So just to recap from our first coaching webinar, just in terms of like why coaching matters, as we think about the need to increase access and impact of coaching, the reason we believe that's important is that coaches are the intervention. So this is data from Joyce and Showers that really shows that in order to change educator practice, we have to provide additional instructional coaching alongside of that. So all of the money that we're spending on professional development, training methods that aren't connected to coaching directly yield 0 to 5% translation into the classroom application. So we know coaching matters. And so that's really why we're focusing on today, how do we shift the perception of coaching so that we can get it to more of our educators? We know that there are huge benefits to instructional coaching, both for students as well as for teachers directly. And so these are just a little bit of the overview of those highlights of the benefits. They come from the Kraft, Blazer, and Hogan article and Gregory et al. So those two resources are available on our website if you want to have access to those research articles to actually dive a little bit more deeply into any of these benefits. So obviously, I don't have to tell you that coaching has an image problem. If you're paying attention to educators on X, formerly known as Twitter, and topics of instructional coaching, you will see educators really sharing some of the common negative stigma that is associated with it. So I know you may not be able to see or read all of these, but essentially, we've got Jeremy here saying that having some busybody coach have to make up stuff while we talk once a week is dreadful. They've obviously that is leading to this perception that coaching is a waste of their time. I'm also thinking about how educators who are coaches don't necessarily have the training and the support that they need to be successful. So we think about, coaching is seen as a weapon in terms of educators being afraid of it. So again, you can go in and search the terms instructional coaching and see what comes up for you. Interestingly, though, this isn't just a perception that's associated with that new and kind of seasoned veteran teachers hold. When we ask even more veteran teachers, so this was a post that was shared really around having experienced educators who opt out of meetings with their instructional coach. And the framing of this was, that experienced educator meeting with their coach makes their coach better, which we wholeheartedly agree with. It is that particular Twitter thread or X thread was met with a lot of negative responses, right? That again, the instructional coaches don't do much of anything. So clearly, educators don't understand what instructional coaches do or are supposed to do. They give like not very helpful feedback. So everything looks good, but there's not really anything constructive that comes out of it. Again, most educators think that their instructional coaches aren't qualified. We're not quite sure what that means, but obviously they're not trained to do their job. This 23-year-old veteran has never had a good coach. That just hurts my heart when you see that. Again, thinking through why people go into coaching, even the perception that people who are in coaching don't want to be in the classroom anymore. And then worse off, that that coach is some type of a plant from your administrator team. So clearly, if we want to expand access to instructional coaching, we have to address the perception of how our educators see it. Whether or not we coach veteran educators, we know that veteran educators are leaders in our schools. So if they see instructional coaching through this lens, we know that that's going to trickle down into our new or our struggling teachers. Of course, at Ribbit, we think every teacher deserves a coach, no matter their performance rating or their years of experience. But short of that, we absolutely have to start shifting the perception of instructional coaches for all of our educators. So let's kind of unpack that. Obviously, this is not new to the last few years. We've got really research as far back as 2014 with the Gates Foundation, where they talked to educators in focus groups, and those educators shared their negative stigmas around instructional coaching. So similarly to some of the comments, Sarah and Barbie, that, there's a perception that coaching is really just for those who need to be fixed, that there's something wrong with them. And fixed is also connected to newness, right? Because if you're new, obviously you can't possibly know what to do in the classroom, so we have to fix your practice. But educators' perception of coaching is also linked to this feeling that it's a scarce commodity. We saw in those Twitter or X posts that it's a waste of time and that it's evaluative in nature. So those four kind of perceptions are really threats to expanding access to instructional coaching to more educators. So we're going to talk about what might be contributing to those perceptions so that we can think through how do we problem solve and change those perceptions. So coaching is seen as scarce. There's a lot of financial, human capital, and structural impacts here. And so we were not going to necessarily impact what goes with which. But like I said, I think financial constraints lead first, because oftentimes human capital is a direct relationship with your budget, how many people you can hire, as well as some of your structural elements. So when coaching happens, the time of day or being able to dedicate time is also often linked to financial. So if we think about the things in our school systems that contribute to these perceptions, I think almost always we lead with or start with an analysis of finances, because those lead to really how we deploy our coaches if we have them, and the structures of coaching in our program. So you can see on the screen, scarcity is really associated with limited capacity. There aren't enough coaches for each educator to have a coach. So by default, their coaches are assigned to most often new or struggling teachers. Also, that in a lot of systems, our coaches are assigned to educators who teach in tested subject areas or grade levels, because those are high accountability teachers. So because we have limited capacity, those educators that receive them are really these targeted educators. So we create kind of a pathology around coaching. Also, a lot of times coaching isn't dedicated, or time for coaching isn't dedicated or allocated in a master schedule. So coaches are trying to fit in coaching with teachers when they don't have planning or prep times to support that. And then many times we have coaches whose work is really focused. So we might have a literacy coach who's clearly their role is focused on literacy, or data coaches. So when, as a system, we have limited capacity, we also then now create this condition where it seems like coaching is a scarce commodity. So I want you to stop and think and reflect quickly. Do educators in your system perceive your coaching program, as being a scarce commodity? And if so, how do you know? What evidence or data do you have that would suggest that we have a scarcity kind of mentality or stigma around coaching? I'll give you about a minute to just process that question. If you're comfortable, feel free to drop your thoughts into the chat. Rob, anything in the chat?
Yes. So Barbie says that coaches are often pulled to be substitute teachers, and they're often assigned to those who need them most, and that educators that are doing well don't necessarily get time with coaches. And Sarah thinks that, in fact, well, actually, Sarah writes that yes, teachers think that it is only for new teachers, and they seem to think not all teachers need a coach.
Great. So let's go on to that fixing condition or stigma. So again, there's probably more reasons beyond what's on the screen. But in our experience, my experience, back to both what Sarah and Barbie brought up, really it's a fixing mentality or fixing stigma when only new or struggling educators have that coach. Now, again, that's clearly driven by financial and human capital conditions. Whether or not we have capacity to coach every teacher is dependent on whether we have funds to have those full-time equivalent coaches or release time coaches. So prioritizing new or struggling teachers makes sense, but it also translates to the rest of the educators in the building feeling like, well, if there's nothing wrong with me, I don't need a coach. Also, sometimes it's associated with a school culture where making mistakes that could be associated with taking risks and experimenting with new techniques triggers coaching. So if all of a sudden we're risk taking and changing our behavior as part of a continuous improvement process and our scores go down, that sometimes triggers coaching, right? Like what's going on in, Rob's classroom. And so then again, that associated coaching support is now seen as, well, you were doing well before, now you're trying something different, it's not working, let's send in the reinforcements. And then the last possible fixing condition is where coaching itself is very directive rather than dialogical. So the coaching model, the way coaches are either trained or they're performing their coaching role, is very directive. You should do things this way, or this is how we want them to be done, or this is how I did it when I was in the classroom and got all of these, wonderful, great test scores, if that's, the connection between the coach and their coachee. So coaching models that are very directive also lead to this fixing mentality, because it isn't, let's help you get better in your practice and brainstorm ways to do it. There's a one right way to do it. So again, want you to think about in your own condition, in your experiences with instructional coaching, do educators perceive your coaching program as being designed to fix them? And if so, how do you know? Give you about 30 seconds to think on that. And Rob, feel free to share those when you see them in the chat. All right, Rob, anything in the chat?
Nothing in the chat. Well, here's
Okay.
actually Barbie just wrote something and said when coaches end up being assigned to those who may be struggling only, those teachers get a negative perspective of their own teaching practice and it becomes a stigma.
Exactly.
Mhm.
All right. So then let's look at the sort of the next set of perceptions, that negative perception that's coaching is seen as a waste of time. So those who have coaching or have experienced coaching don't see value in it. Again, there's probably lots of different reasons why this might be the case. Again, sometimes linked to the financial constraints in the district around time or expectations, the structure of the coaching program itself. So how it's designed in terms of delivering and expectations operationally. But what we oftentimes see is that when coaches have a perceived lack of qualification for that role or training in some places, especially small schools that are trying to build up a coaching program, or in schools with high turnover, their coach may only have a few years of teaching experience themselves. So that lack of depth in their experience means that sometimes they're not seen as qualified as a coach because they just haven't taught very long themselves, or there isn't training associated with their coaching program or coaching role. And so what that coach does with the teachers themselves is, seen as a waste because they're not quite sure what their job is. If you reflect back on a few of those Twitter or X statements, it's like they don't even know what they're supposed to be doing, let alone being able to help me. Coaches' expertise, what we see this absolutely in the research is that when their coaches' expertise, whether that's their grade level, content area, or specialization, doesn't align with the educator's needs. So, in the case of a learning or a literacy coach, for example, right, that literacy coach going in and coaching a math teacher probably doesn't happen because of the conditions and the structure of their program. But if they were going in to coach a math teacher, it could be perceived as a waste of that math teacher's time because this person's expertise is in literacy, for example. So when there's a misalignment between expertise and needs, we often see that feels like their teacher's time is being wasted or there's not value placed in that coaching relationship. Get back to this, educators don't generally value the experience of their coach. That could be connected to qualifications. And then a lot of times, unfortunately, coaching is focused on compliance activities rather than what the educator needs to grow or what their students need. So in many coaching roles, and I think Barbie mentioned this, when they step into administrative responsibilities and have to be the one who checks off things, whether that's a compliance activity or an expectation, from their administrator, that definitely is not seen as coaching, which then feels like a waste of their coaching time. Ultimately, when roles and responsibilities aren't clear, what that coach is expected to do, that starts to breed this feeling of like, I'm not sure what I'm doing with my coach. They're not sure what they're supposed to be doing either. So all of that seems wasteful. So again, think about and reflect on your own experience as leading coaching or as a coach. Do you feel like that is true in your program? So do educators perceive coaching whenever it happens and from whoever it happens to or with as a waste of time? We're going to keep moving just in the interest of time, speaking of time. And then the last, major kind of negative perception, if we can kind of summarize or categorize these perceptions and some of the details underneath them, is that coaching is seen as evaluative. We certainly believe, and what we see from the research is that non-evaluative coaching is what moves the needle in terms of changing teachers' practice. But when coaching is seen as part of the evaluation process, it absolutely undermines and shuts down the success of that relationship. So what we can see, and again, in systems where they don't have financial or human capital capacity to hire coaches, oftentimes that role is done by an evaluator. That might be an assistant principal or a principal, or maybe even a dean of students. Sometimes it's a department chair. And so then we start to build this gray area. But when coaching is conducted primarily by an evaluator, it is definitely seen as evaluative. There's just no way around it, right? The human condition wants to please the person who's evaluating them. And when that person comes in, even with good and well intentions to be having formative conversations, it just doesn't translate in the same way. When coaching is not confidential, so when you have coaches in a coaching role, but the conversations that happen in the coaching space are not seen as confidential, or that coaches struggle to build relational trust between the educator that they're coaching, this almost always feels like an evaluative activity then. You see that when an administrator is asking for information to come from the coach. And so then the educator doesn't feel like they are in a psychologically safe space to have a coaching conversation. And therefore, anytime that coach is in their room, it now starts to feel like a gotcha. Coaches' responsibilities sometimes include those quasi-administrative tasks. So as we assign coaches to sub duties, like Barbie said, or bus duty because we need somebody to fill in, the more that educators in the classroom that are being coached by those coaches see them taking on these administrative or quasi-administrative roles, the grayer their roles and responsibilities become. And so it's not always clear to them when they're in my classroom, are they serving as an administrator or in a quasi-administrative role, or are they here to help me get better? There are lots of observation and feedback cycles clearly that are associated with coaching, as well as the formal evaluation process. But anytime an educator feels like that when a coach is in their room, it's designed as a gotcha. They're looking for something that's going wrong, right? That's kind of that comorbid fixing perception. They're only in my room because something's wrong with me, or I have to do something differently. Or worse yet, they feel like that coach is a spy, in quotes, for the administrator. They're gathering information or evidence that somebody's trying to collect so that they can exit me out of the classroom. So definitely these would be sort of the most kind of negative perceptions that teachers would have about coaching, but they're really pervasive when we think about our structures that we have in our schools and the operations of how we develop and deliver our coaching programs. So take a second and just reflect on the educators that you work with. Do they perceive your coaching or coaching program as being evaluative? How do you know?
There's a comment that says, I have been asked to carry a clipboard when going into teachers' classrooms. So it feels invasive to teachers that,
Yeah, nothing says I'm here to help you like a clipboard.
yes,
Totally.
nothing says evaluation like a clipboard.
Yes, exactly. Like a checklist,
Yes.
literally. Yeah. Well, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing those. So, one of the things as we transition from, okay, these are perceptions, and they're very common, sadly. We want to make sure that we try to talk through, okay, well, how can we affirmatively assess our educators' perceptions of coaching? Because we can't really truly address them and remedy them until we have a better sense of what they feel about their coaching program in the school that they're working with, or with their coaches. So these are just a few different strategies that you can collect data or evidence about how educators feel about coaching. If you are having coaching sessions, we always encourage post-coaching surveys. So the educator can provide feedback around coaching and their coach specifically. And so that could happen at multiple intervals. Um, you interview your coaches and your coachees just to kind of get a sense of what they're hearing and what they feel like. If you have a safe enough space, your culture lends itself to either interviews or focus groups. Focus groups just have more than one educator participating in that conversation. You might have coaches' time and effort logs. So if you're funding your coaching program out of any federal funds, Title II, or Title I or Title II, or even some of your ESSER funds, you may have attached time and effort logs to that funding stream. It would be an interesting activity to evaluate, actually, where are your coaches spending the majority of their time? How much of their time are they actually spending on coaching, so that you can start to see whether or not those other quasi-administrative or administrative duties are really taking up more of their time. And then you could obviously do a more comprehensive formative evaluation. On our website, we have a coaching program evaluation form that we've created. It's designed as a sample survey. So if you decide that you're interested in it, you can go to our website, and we'll also send a link directly with the resources after this webinar. But you can see that it's actually in two parts. The first part is the program overall, and then the second part is the relationship with a coach. This particular coaching program evaluation is something that we can, and we'd be happy to customize for individual schools or districts so that they can start to collect some data. But assessing true perceptions is going to be an important part of changing those perceptions. Second set of resources that we wanted to share with you, and this also speaks to a lot of the concerns about roles and responsibilities and not necessarily knowing what the coach is supposed to do, or they're not necessarily trained in coaching per se, is a set of program and practice standards. So shockingly enough, there are lots of coaching programs in schools that are not driven by any professional practice standards for coaching. And so we invite you to review these two documents so that you can determine and ground the work that your coaches do, as well as the way that you've developed your program. These are from the new Teacher Center, so not anything that we created at Ribbit, but we've utilized both of these sets of standards in the way that we've developed our coaching program and the activities that our coaches do. So our program is designed intentionally with respect to effective instructional coaching, and our coaches who coach teachers across the country work towards their effectiveness in these particular coaching standards. So just like there are national teaching standards and national administrator standards, there's this set of national coaching standards that may help to address the concerns that the roles and responsibilities aren't clear. It's not sure, teachers aren't sure what their coach is supposed to be doing anyway. So really making transparent these behaviors and these activities is helpful. We've also created an instructional coaching self-assessment that's aligned to the practice standards. And so that's also on our website. So this helps guide our coaches identification of areas that they can grow in, but can be used by schools and districts as well as they think about how to continue to train and support their own instructional coaches. So again, our coaching standards are really modeled after or a derivative of the new Teacher Center standards, and both of those resources are available on our website. So quickly, as we are coming to an end, I want to give you an opportunity to close and reflect on the conversation so far today. So consider one or both of these prompts. Are educators' perceptions of instructional coaching warranted? So these negative perceptions or the stigma around instructional coaching, do you feel like they are warranted based on what we've chatted about? And then second could be what could be done to improve educator perception of instructional coaching. So I'll give you about a minute or two to just stop and reflect on either of these two questions. If you feel comfortable sharing an answer to one or the other or both, please feel free to drop that in the chat.
Barbara says, yes, they are warranted. Quality training for coaches is necessary. Value coaching and using it as a team approach with teachers, a safe place and a collaborative place.
Thanks for sharing, Barbie.
And Sarah, I think they're probably warranted based on their own personal experiences with coaching, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. All right, so let's just recap. We reflected on some of the conditions, human capital, financial, and operational, that lead to those negative perceptions. And we reviewed and gone over a few tools that you can use to assess educator perceptions, as well as start to shift those changes in their perceptions. So hopefully you feel like we've accomplished our learning objectives for today. I just want to share that we are here as a team to really support your journey of expanding access to instructional coaching for new, veteran, and every educator in between, as well as instructional coaches themselves and administrators. So, we know that by improving working conditions and helping more teachers have access to the benefits of an instructional coach, that helps to grow them in their practice, but also keep them in your classrooms, and then ultimately help to improve the quality of teaching and outcomes for your students. So if there's anything that we can be of service and support to you, please feel free to reach out. Don't hesitate to call us. And then our last two upcoming webinars are coming up. The next will be benefits of virtual instructional coaching, which is the coaching model that we've created so that we can expand access to high quality instructional coaching to more educators. And then last but not least will be sort of an investigation on why human beings who are instructional coaches still matter despite all of the changes and AI innovations that are coming down the road. So thank you so much for taking some time to be with us today. We're going to end just a few minutes early because we want to get you out the door. But if there are any questions or thoughts, I'm happy to open the floor and just dialogue about anything that we've talked about today, or even anything from the first coaching webinar, if you'd like to chat.
I didn't read it before, but I noticed that Sarah also added to her comment there that she is currently a district coach, and it's really difficult to change perceptions because it also has to do with what coaches and admin at the site say, which is so very true.
Absolutely. Well, wonderful. If there aren't any other thoughts or comments or discussion that we want to have, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward, hopefully, to see you at the next one, and enjoy your 5 minutes extra. Go take a quick little walk out in the beautiful sunshine.